Today we're going to begin our look at the book Cultivating Genius. So Cultivating Genius is a book that's based on the history of African American literacy, but it's not just looking at it on behalf of African American students, but all students, because it's a very powerful story, as we will see. And so the scholar who did this research and who wrote this book looked at this powerful literacy story and really thought about what kind of teaching in schools could take advantage of the lessons that's learned from this powerful story. So again, it's not something that's meant only for African American students, but a way of looking at reading for everyone. Now, in schools, one of the things I hope you take away from this class, if you take nothing else, that one size fits all teaching, where you just teach the same for everybody, simply doesn't work. And so, but that's sadly something that still dominates and is very prominent in our educational system. And so, one of the rationale for teaching everyone the same is that it's fair. So, is teaching everyone the same fair? So, I'd like for you to think about that. And again, I have some questions for you to answer in response to this presentation. And so, you'll have an opportunity to, create a Google Doc and send me your answers to the questions. Now, the prevailing view of African American slaves was that they were incapable of reading and writing. And so the absence of the ability to read and write written literacy was used to justify slavery. The written literacy, reading and writing was seen as, an example of the superiority of Western European based culture and the fact that African American slaves didn't have this sort of written literacy was justification. Well, they should be slaves because they're not at the same cultural level as we are. And so there was an kind of ignoring the fact that they had a very powerful oral literacy, which later they built their literacy on. And so that's something that wasn't really taken into consideration. And so even though the prevailing view was that they were incapable of reading and writing, there were still laws passed against them reading or writing or teaching them how to read and write. So, why was reading and writing illegal for slaves? We touched on that a little bit last week, but I want you to formally share your views on it because it's a very important question. Because it's a view of literacy that we kind of lose with the assumption that everybody has access to and everybody knows how to do it. And so this particular quote really changed my career because the runaway slave, in African American history is like an iconic figure, a heroic figure. And until I read this, I did not realize that reading and writing were so connected to this iconic heroic act. You just think it's a brave person who, a clever person, a strong person who managed to escape slavery. But reading and writing connected to people taking that kind of action was something that I had never heard before. So you have a quote from Frederick Douglass: "The more I read, the more I fought against slavery." Again, connecting reading to resistance to that kind of human oppression, something that we really don't connect in our present day view of literacy. So, literacy for African American slaves began to equal freedom. They literally felt that if they learned how to read, they could be free. And so, when we get to the questions, I want you to kind of explain, what that means. Why was literacy and reading and writing equal to freedom? And another very important question, and this kind of gets at what this book is about. If literacy were taught in schools in a way now that it equals freedom, what would that look like? What would it look like if kids realize, and we taught in a way that we realize literacy has so much power that it can liberate you? What would that literacy look like? So here's an example of just how passionate African American, recently liberated African Americans were following their emancipation from slavery. Makeshift schools were jammed with pupils. Men came home tired from their labors. They sit in their dories with their open books till the dust drives them to their firelight and are joined at their sides by their little ones. Just think about that for a second. People who've been engaged in physical labor all day, once that labor is over, they're cramming rooms that literacy is being taught in, and they're staying there until it's too dark to continue with the class. And then afterwards, they go to their places of habitation, start fires so that they continue to read and to teach their children. Very powerful. So, another very important question: how would reading need to be taught or need to have been taught to maintain that passion, that level of passion for reading and writing? What would that look like? So, you have these recently emancipated people who are so passionate about something that we take for granted today, including African American children. And so what would reading instruction need to look like to have maintained that level of passion and enthusiasm for reading and writing? Another very important element related to this book, Cultivating Genius: these slaves hungered not only for knowledge, but for a new sense of self. What do you think that means? That wasn't just knowledge and information, but somehow they believe reading was going to enable them to become a new kind of person. Please make sense of that. So, the book Cultivating Genius is an attempt to provide the response to that question. And it gets at, and what we'll talk about throughout the next several class sessions, the learning priority of identity. So, identity, creating a new identity or creating an identity that students and young people aspire to possess for themselves, is really the priority in the reading and writing experience taken from the lessons of these very passionate, recently emancipated African Americans. So now we have these labels that we put on people related to reading and writing. We're not going to really address that question yet, but this is kind of, looking at, how reading and writing instruction looks now for many, often for students who are struggling with reading. And so one of the things that Cultivating Genius does is that it contrasts the way we normally teach reading and writing now with the approach to reading and writing that is based on this enthusiasm for reading and writing of these newly emancipated African Americans. And so one of those contrasts is that schools prioritize skill development and they separate students based on their success or failure as it relates to skill development, because skill development is the priority. And that's where the lack of skill developments gets you to this particular status of at risk, disadvantaged, struggling reader, tier three, or these are all low reading and writing level categories that you get put into based on the failure of the student to become a proficient reader or writer. I'm sorry, this is not coming out right. Hold on a second. Let me make sure get this. Okay, so this is a very important question, which you'll be answering as well. So, cultivating genius, again, the priority is identity. And the rationale, again, not just for African American students, but for all students, this identity priority is captured in these three kind of criteria. So, students, you must know who you are, why you are important to this world, and learn how to be you in this world. Again, this encapsulates the essence of what was learned from this examination of the African American literacy history and its profound enthusiasm for reading and writing. You must know who you are, why you are important to this world, and learn how to be you. So, is this something, and this is a question I want you to answer, is this something that would be beneficial for all students to come away with from literacy instruction with an understanding of these three principles, even though it's based on an African American experience? Okay, so thank you very much. For the rest, I'll send you the questions and a list via email. So following this presentation, I would like for each of you to make a Google Doc and answer the questions that are listed in the email that you'll receive based on this presentation. So thank you, and I hope you have a great day. And I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday.